Now, John Weir enlisted on September 4th, 1939, the day after Britain declared war, but almost a week before Canada did. He really wanted to serve. He was posted, after he got his wings, to 401 Squadron RAF, which was the #1 Canadian squadron. It used to be #1 RCAF, but it was really the top RAF squadron of the Canadian fighter pilots. By 1941, November, pretty much all the pilots in his squadron had been either killed or had been moved elsewhere. They had so many casualties, there was constant replacements. And so they were constantly flying with new pilots. And John, who was a flight leader, was always being put out with a new partner, which made them very nervous. Quite simply, they flew at that time in pairs, 2 planes flying together. And so the leader, who would be John Weir, would be here, the tailman there, and they would watch each other's back. But they would only know what to do if they'd flown a lot together and how to protect one another. And the guy flying with John had not had any experience with John. And so it was very nervous-making. They were scrambled into action across the channel to do a little attack, a sweep of the Germans. And almost immediately, as they crossed the border, they were attacked from up high by Messerschmitts, who came down very fast and high. Now, John did the one thing he should not have done, which is that he glanced around just to see if Gardner, his tailman, was in position. Now, you know there's a romantic fantasy of silk scarves for pilots, but there's truth in it, because pilots, when they're flying, are constantly looking for where they're being attacked. And so they're constantly doing this, and it rubs their collars. They wore shirt and ties in the planes, and they started wearing silk scarves to protect their necks from the strain on their collar, from constantly looking around. But John, when he looked around, made a mistake, even though it was a split second, because when he turned back, the planes were gone. That's because the planes are flying towards one another at about 375 miles an hour, which is very fast. And in the split second that they were gone, he heard his tailman shout a warning over the radio, and then a second later a scream, and he was dead before John had a chance to think. And a moment later, John's wing was blown off by a cannon from the Messerschmitt. And then a couple of seconds later, machine gun fire took out his instrument panel. And now there was gasoline from the upper tank spraying back on him, and raw oxygen, and the entire cockpit caught fire. And within seconds, John managed to bail out. And so he landed in France, pretty badly burned and pretty badly beaten up, and behind enemy lines. But the curious thing was, he was better prepared than most to deal with such a situation. And there was a reason for that. It was his father. Gordon Weir was a farm boy from West Flamborough near Hamilton, but he made good. He enlisted at the beginning of the First War with the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, and he became a captain of a machine gun regiment. By the end of the war, he'd been promoted to lieutenant colonel. He'd won 2 MCs, a DSO, been wounded several times, mentioned in dispatches. And he just was an extraordinary soldier. He believed his family were Scots. He believed the Scots had survived because they were survivors. And he had a strong feeling about that. And if he ever had a son, his son too would be a survivor. Now, Gordon founded MacLeod Young Weir, among other things. He was also founded the Granite Club. And here's a picture of Gordon at the groundbreaking of the Granite Club and the Badminton and Racquet Club. But what he loved as much as anything was Algonquin Park. And he would go up whenever he could for a week or two to go fishing and hunting. When he went, he would bring with him an Ojibwa guide by the unusual name of Fiji, who had lived in the park. And John, when he was an age, about 9 years old, used to come with them. And John became entranced by Fiji because Fiji could read the ground and taught John how to do things like walk silently and how to find your way through the woods and how to read animals. And it was an incredible education for John. And Gordon, the father, saw this friendship developing and suggested that John invited two buddies. They're all about 9 or 10 years old, and they would go into Algonquin Park with nothing but a penknife each and learn how to survive for a week off the land. And so that is why John and his two friends learned how to survive from Fiji, the Ojibwa. In addition, John went with his dad every summer to Europe. Gordon had clients and in France and in the Netherlands and in Germany. And so he would tag along, but they also went to Germany throughout the rise of the Nazis. And so as a boy, John watched the Nazi Party gain footing and saw it develop and saw his dad explaining what was happening and why it was happening and why he should be really thinking about what's going on and not be caught up in it or deceived by it. What he did not really understand at the time was that his father, Gordon, was helping families escape to Canada with their assets intact. Gordon never talked about it. It was something they never did. You don't broadcast that stuff. It was very low-key. You did it because it was important to do. But John was used as a courier as a boy to run around cities in Germany, to run messages here or there, pick up signals and whatnot. And it was quite an extraordinary education. They were frequently joined by Uncle Adrian, who was a family friend but acted like an uncle. Adrian was in charge of RAF intelligence. And when Gordon was busy, Adrian would walk John around the cities. And they play a game called the memory and observation game, whereby they would leave a hotel room and Uncle Adrian would say to John, so how many windows were in that room? What color were the drapes? How many chairs? What were the people wearing? And he explained this is a game he picked up from Rudyard Kipling. It's known as Kim's game. It's still used, I think, by scouts, but they also played another game called the contact game, which is learning how to follow somebody or how to shake off a tail or how to make yourself invisible in a crowd. This is extraordinary stuff for a teenage kid in Germany on vacation to be being taught by one of the heads of RAF intelligence. But John thought it was just a game. What he did not understand was he was really being trained the whole time. And Adrian also imbued in John a love of flying, because Gordon was obviously Army, but John loved the way Adrian talked about flying, and that became a great secret love. And so John joined the Air Force as soon as he could, and he became known as Scruffy. And let me briefly explain the name Scruffy, because I think it's a pretty cool story. It actually happened when he was at training at Trenton. He was training on an old, He was training on an old lightweight bomber called the Ferry Battle. It was no good for combat anymore. They were training out of Trenton, Ontario. The Ferry Battle had a bad quirk, which is that the engines often caught fire. And so when it was coming into land, it caught fire, but it was good training to get used to how to handle a situation. And as it landed, the engine seized and sprayed glycol, engine coolant, all over John. And it wasn't especially hurtful, but it mottled his uniform into these grays and greens. He looked like hell. He looked awful. But these provisional pilots in training only had one uniform, so he was stuck with it. The next day, they had a surprise inspection by a visiting RAF group captain. So all the men were lined up, and Scruffy, like everybody else, was at prompt attention. And the group captain went up and down. And then he came to John. He looked at John. He thought, and he said to the commanding officer, am I missing something here? I mean, this. And the commanding officer said, no, sir. And so the group captain looked at John again. He says, rather a scruffy-looking individual, wouldn't you say? And there was a ripple of laughter among his friends, and off the group captain left. But the name stuck. And from then on, he was known as Scruffy Weir. Anyway, back to France. So John has landed, been burned, he's in a field. A farmer approaches him, offers to help him. But then as he looks at John, he said, I can't help you. Because John's eyelids had been burned off. All his hair had been gone. He was badly seared across the face, and his hands had been badly burned. And basically, the Frenchman said, you better stay here. It's going to be much safer if the Germans can come and pick you up and look after you. And sure enough, that's what happened about 15 minutes later. And so John was trucked off to Dulag Luft, which is outside of Frankfurt, and interrogated. Pretty standard stuff. All shot down airmen were interrogated at Dulag Luft. It was a great collection center for information. And then after he was interrogated, then he was given very basic medical treatment, which was, with no anesthetic, Vaseline with a bit of boric acid mixed in. They slather the stuff on, put some gauze, and then every morning peel it off again, which was excruciating. But there was literally nothing else they can do. They waited for the skin to regenerate, and after about 2.5 months, it did. At that point, they could send John north from Dulagluft to Stalagluft 1, which is in Barth on the Baltic Sea. It was cold, it was miserable, and all John wanted to do was to escape, because it was a pretty damn bleak place. But he can't even form a fist yet, and he's badly burned, but he still thinks about it. And there's escape committees in place at Stalagluft 1, but it's now February, the ground's frozen, not much is happening. This is John about 3 months after his accident, and the skin is starting to come back, but he's in rough shape. And those black things are really the stumps of what are left of his eyelids. And so he is now aware that he's stuck here, he's kind of incapacitated, and he's as frustrated as he can be because he wants to get away, he wants to get back. All these guys wanted to get back and get back into the fight. But everybody makes light of it and nothing can happen. And then one word comes that they're being transferred to a new escape-proof camp, Stalag 3, which is on the extreme edges of the Polish-German border. It was built in April 1942, and it had all kinds of things that made it impossible to get out of. And so everybody starts pulling together their stuff. They're going to leave in 24 hours. And John collects as much information as he can from the other guys on the escape committee. And off they go. What John has learned, on the train ride from Barth to Stettin, the train goes from Barth to Stettin, past Berlin, and then due east to Poland. Just past Stettin, the train has to go up a high hill, and it slows down. And the guys who were in the know said, that's the place where if you can get out the window, you can roll off the train. So John thinks about this. So it's now 11 o'clock at night, February, 20 below, no, I guess it's March at that point. And he starts thinking, I'm going to do it. He sits down beside the window, there's 2 guys opposite him, and he checks the window, and there's just wooden wedges holding the window shut. So he starts fooling around, loosens one up, and then loosens up the second one. And the guy next to him, Michael, a friend from camp, said, what the hell are you doing? He said, I'm going to escape. The train's going to slow down just outside the city. I'm going to dive out. Do you want to come? Michael said, sure, what the hell, don't give it a whirl. There's 2 guys sitting opposite him. One's an airman he doesn't know, but a young guy and friendly enough. He says, I'll go too. The 4th guy was a Red Cross representative who got caught up and didn't want to be in camp. He shouldn't have been there, but he thought he'd prefer to get out. So he says he's going to come too. John goes up and down the train. There's only one guard at the end, and he doesn't care at all what's going on. John collects food, bits of pieces of chocolate and raisins and things, enough to hold them, and sketches out the plan, puts it in a bag. He says, I'm going to go out the window first when I give you the signal. Somebody throws the food out after me because I can't hold it. I'll go first, then Michael, Red Cross guy, you toss out the food, then you guys follow. That's all good. So, as we've been told, as the train passes through Stettin and starts to climb the hill, the train slows down almost to a stop. Windows go open. John gives the signal, bang, out he goes out the window. And he rolls down the embankment and lies flat beside the train in the snow until the train's out of sight. He then stands up and sees Michael, good. Then they look for the other 2 guys. No 2 guys, they didn't make it. Okay, get the food. No food. They got no food. It's about midnight. They're in northern Germany, behind enemy lines. John's burned. And they have to figure out a way of getting out of there. So John thinks, okay, we're going to go down to the harbor in Stettin and find a ship that will take us across the Baltic to Scandinavia. We're bound to find somebody who'll be sympathetic. They get down to the harbor. They can't find them. There's 2 ships. There's no access to them. They aren't even marked. So they think, okay, John says, backup plan. We're going to go to a whorehouse. Back at camp, I heard about a whorehouse that's staffed by Polish girls. These are daughters of Polish families who did not cooperate with the Nazis. And so the Nazis, to punish them, took their daughters and shipped them off to service the German servicemen. And so they're very sympathetic to Allied flyers, and they're going to look after you. So now they start looking at 2 o'clock in the morning for the whorehouse. They find a house with the lights on at about 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. They see a couple of guys coming out. It's got to be the place. So John says, okay, this is the plan. These places all look the same. We're going to go in the front door. There'll be a hallway, goes right down to the back. And then we come up the back stairs, the second floor, and that's where the girls are. Now, you'll see when we go in, there's going to be a reception room or a bar or something. When we go in, we don't look there, we don't stop there, we just go straight through. You speak to nobody. We ignore that. We're there for the girls, that's all we want. But as soon as we start getting into a conversation, we're in trouble. And if anybody stops you, John says, Michael, you're deaf and dumb, you can't speak. So just play it that way. Good? So John goes first. The door's unlocked. And he goes straight to the back, just as he expected. Peripheral vision, he sees somebody like bars, people, something happening. But that's fine. Nobody stops him. Right to the back, turns around, heads up the stairs. He pauses. Here's the front door. It's Michael coming in. Good. John starts carrying up, and then all of a sudden he hears a voice saying, "Halt!" in German, and a pistol being flicked. And then, "And you." John comes back, and there is a Gestapo officer holding a gun on Michael. So, the Gestapo in German says, "Who are you guys?" And John, in broken Quebecois accented French, and a bit of German, says, "Well, we're a couple of French POWs, forced labor. We just wanted to get home for a bit to see our families and check on them. You know, just, I know we shouldn't," but the Gestapo says, no, that's not happening. I understand, guys. But he buys them a glass of beer and a sandwich. It's all very relaxed. And the Gestapo officer starts making small talk about girlfriends and families and where John was raised, and asks a couple of things of Michael. Michael says nothing. And the Gestapo says, what's wrong with your friend? "Oh, Dummkopf," says John. "Deaf and dumb, shell-shocked, can't talk." "Oh, well, fair enough." And so the Gestapo asks a few more specifics about the town that John was from. And then, without missing a beat in perfect English, he turns to Michael and says, "Where are you from?" And Michael says, "Surrey," and smiles. And they all laugh. And they all have a good laugh. And the Gestapo says, I'll tell you, I got to take you guys in to Gestapo headquarters, and it's not going to be very nice. You're going to be interrogated for about a week, but it's got to happen." And that's indeed exactly what happened. They took him in. And then a week later, they were put on a train to the new camp on the Polish frontier in Sagan, called Stalag 3. It was a tough camp, because it had high wire fences, it had guard towers with machine guns and searchlights, and microphones buried underground to listen for sounds of digging. And it was really the top-notch camp in Germany. And John was Kriegi number 715. And Kriegi is a short form for Kriegsgefangener, which is literally prisoner of war. And that's where John's third act begins. Because the other prisoners had only arrived about a week or so before, and John, who was a teenager, had worked up northern Ontario as a mining worker, digging mines, knew something about tunneling. And in camp, he met up with an old friend of his from Sunday school in Toronto, Wally Floody, and together the two of them engineered and dug the tunnels for what became known as the Great Escape. One of the most extraordinary stories. And that is basically the end of my talk for today. But is it any wonder that these stories, for me, keep Remembrance Day alive? They bring history to life. So for me, they're more than just stories. These are 550 people across the country that I've met, and now I'm trying to figure out ways to introduce them to students. But John, he was something else. And for those of you who never, ever had a chance to meet him, you have my condolences, because you would have loved him. He was the loveliest, brightest man, and something else. So it was an honor for me to meet him, and it was an honor for me to share his story with you. And thank you for having me to talk about it.